Hello and welcome to Euphoria. In this video I'd like to show you some of the techniques I used to plan my Lego city layout. I'll be quickly looking at the tables I'm using, thinking about how to fit Lego buildings and other stuff on those tables, and how to plan the layout of the city and how it might look. So my idea is to build a Lego city layout using a mixture of Lego modular buildings from the Creator Expert modular buildings range, my own designs for buildings, and lots of other layout ideas and features to make a Lego city. Actually, I'd like to make the city centre of a traditional, probably European style city or large town. I say the city centre because I don't have a basement or a large room or a massive shed or a barn to build a huge Lego city in. So I'm building a modest city that will fit in a smallish spare room, and I'm not going to be making the seaside, an airport, amusement park or anything else that takes up a huge area. So let's start by looking at the tables I'm using to build my Lego city on. There are lots of ways to build a Lego city, and not everyone wants to build them on tables. But I decided to build my Lego city on dedicated tables. So I bought some IKEA tables. The ones I've bought are 150 centimeters wide and 75 centimeters deep. That's quite large. And in fact, IKEA don't make these tables in this size anymore, but I got this size for a reason. Lego base plates are 32 studs square and measure 10 inches by 10 inches or 25.4 centimeters by 25.4 centimeters. So I can get 3 base plates in the depth of this table with just a slight overhang, and I can get 6 base plates along the length of this table. That gives my city an initial size of 18 base plates, just on the first table. Now I actually bought 2 of these tables, so on these 2 tables I could get 36 base plates. Depending on how I use that space for buildings, streets, squares or other open spaces, I could probably get up to 30 modular buildings on 2 tables, which should keep me going for a while. So I'll just start with 1 table, and then later on I can decide how I want to expand onto the second table. Now just a word about roads. I know it's very tempting to use road plates in my Lego city, either the traditional ones or the newer and smaller ones, but they take up a lot of room and constrain the layout to a considerable extent. So as this is meant to be, at least in part, an old city centre, I'm going to avoid having roads and road plates in the city centre itself. Instead, I'm going to try to build a city centre with narrower streets and alleys, maybe not even in straight lines, but then opening out into the city square in the middle. You may be disappointed to find that there won't be any trains in my Lego city, at least not for a long time. Trains and a railway layout take up a lot of space, especially if you want continuous running, which requires curves and corners, as these don't go very well in a Lego city centre. In order to try out various ways to lay out the city, I've made these maquettes, or small models out of Lego, of some of the standard Lego modular buildings and my own designs. They're built on little 4x4 plates, and in that space I make a small representation of one standard modular building. So in effect they're 1/8 scale models of the standard modular buildings that are on a 32x32 base plate. Of course, for a half modular on a 16x32 base plate, I make the maquettes to the same scale on a 2x4 plate. I build them from Lego and I try to use the same colours as the modular building that I'm modelling, and I build them in roughly the same shape and proportions as the building they represent. Now I could just use square pieces of paper with something written on them and lay them out to represent the city, but these little models are better than that for visualising what the city will look like. Of course, they're less detailed than if I made a set of computer-aided design models on the computer, but they're easier to play with. They're a bit like chess pieces, and I can move them around easily. So let me show you a few examples of these maquettes. Here's one of the Parisian restaurant, which is a Lego modular building set on a standard modular base plate in a straight format. This one is the old astronomical clock tower, which is one of my own designs, again on a standard modular base plate, but this time in a corner format. This one represents the pet shop, which is a Lego modular building set on a half modular base plate, and this is the townhouse, which is the other half of the pet shop modular building set. This one represents the detective's office, which is another Lego modular building set on a standard modular base plate. And here I've got a little model of my extended brick bank and laundrette, which is another one of my own designs, modified from the Lego brick bank modular building set and converted from a corner into an extended straight modular building, and this one is on 1.5 standard base plates. And then here I've made a scale representation of the town square with a fountain in the middle, which is built on 4 32 by 32 base plates. So this maquette, built again at 1/8 scale, is on 1 8 by 8 building plate. Now, so that I can position these maquettes and play around with different city layouts, I made a scale representation of the tabletops out of cardboard. They need to be to the same scale as the Lego maquettes, so in effect that's 1/8 the size of the real tables that I'm using. So the 150 times 75 centimetre tables are represented by these pieces of card, which are 194 millimetres by 87 millimetres. I've marked squares on the cardboard, the same size as the 4x4 plates that represent the 32 by 32 base plates for modular buildings. These indicate where the base plates would go if they were all lined up to cover the tables, and as you can see, that's the size of 3 base plates by 6 base plates, as I mentioned earlier. If I use half base plates, I can just put them in the same spaces. So I can position the maquettes that I've made in various layouts on these pieces of card and see how the different buildings fit next to each other, the spaces that they leave between, and how the layout might look. So now I'm going to think about how I want to lay out my Lego city. I want to build a Lego city that looks like a fairly traditional city centre with a main square in the middle. On one side, which I envisage as this left-hand side, I want to have the old part of town. This will have older style buildings, which tend to be smaller and built of traditional materials like wood, brick and stone. Parts of the old town might have survived from the medieval period. Other parts might have been converted or replaced, but still be what I would call traditional in style. So I definitely want to have my old astronomical clock tower on this side, and I'll look for other traditional style buildings, perhaps starting with the Parisian restaurant, to go in the old part of town. I want to have my town square in the middle, and although a small square such as a single base plate might be sufficient, I want to have a larger square that will have space for a fountain in it and some more impressive buildings around the square, perhaps civic buildings or traditional houses and businesses. On the other side of town, I'd like to add some more modern buildings and maybe create a kind of business district. This can represent an expansion of the city away from the old medieval quarter. The idea is that this part of the city will contain more modern buildings that are likely to be the size of standard modular buildings or even larger. I also need to think about viewpoints. Whilst I don't want the city to be only viewed from one side, it's going into a fairly small room, so I probably won't be able to get round the back of the table very easily. So that means I will have a kind of main viewpoint from the front. Now, the backs of the Lego buildings are often rather boring, and they're meant to be viewed mainly from the front. So I want the city buildings to mostly face that way, so I can see their best sides rather than looking at the backs. Obviously, if you had a city that would be viewed from all sides, then you'd probably want the backs to face into the middle, so that the fronts of the buildings can be viewed from all sides of the city. So on one of my tables there's space for 3 rows of modular buildings. But I don't just want to have 3 rows of buildings facing the front. I want a more natural layout with buildings facing onto the square and having streets and alleyways between them, and maybe some open areas or small squares. Now, as I said, I do have another table. I'll need to consider how I lay that out in the room, but that would give me more space to expand the city further. And I'll think about that a bit later on. I hope you enjoyed seeing how I planned the setup of my Lego city. I really like the Lego modular building sets, and I'll probably build some more of them and place them in suitable positions in the city. But as you can see, I also like to modify them or make my own mocks. That can be quite challenging, it's very satisfying, but unfortunately it does take a lot of time. So my city will be a mix of the standard Lego modular buildings and some of my own design, as well as other features and points of interest that I'd like to put into my city. So why not subscribe to this channel to see more about the development of my Lego city and the builds that will go into it. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back again very soon.